Yay! So, welcome to Mental Health Night. I'm going to actually turn off. Well, if I'm over here, it won't like. Okay, just trying to find the right place. Welcome to Mental Health Night. We have Selah Rossetti talking about embracing the path. Is there a way? Let's see.
So we can get all this off
Yep.
the top.
Sorry. Technical stuff. And then hide that. Yep, there we go. Okay. Ta-da!
Do I just hit these? How do I like
Yeah, so you can hit that, and it will go to like the next one, I think. Or not.
Oh, I have
Okay.
to click the... Okay, there it goes.
There we go.
Okay.
We figured it
It's
out.
okay
So if you're on the Zoom, you'll be able to see the shared slides, but
Yeah.
if you are on Facebook Live or in person,
Yeah, for those on Facebook
We
Live,
got this here.
hopefully you can see this behind me. Let me know if I'm in the way. Okay. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about acceptance of what I'm going to use as the word of a disability or like an impairment. And we're going to be embracing the path. And this is for family, friends, and impacted individuals who are affected by impairments or disabilities. So starting out, here's kind of what we're going to go through. I'm going to start off with some key terms just to let everyone kind of understand what I'm going to be taking you through. We're going to talk about social stigma and how that affects acceptance, social frameworks. That's kind of just about like how the world views disability. We're going to talk about disability identity development, historical influences, self-advocacy work, and then mixed in throughout this entire session is going to be resources. But if anyone has any questions about other resources, I know quite a few, so feel free to chime in the chat. Okay, so some of the key terms is impairment, so that means an abnormality of a psychological, physiological, or anatomical structure. So impairment can be visible or non-visible, and I'm kind of going to just encompass that's going to be encompassed by the word disability throughout this presentation. So if you hear the word disability, just know I'm covering all of those impairments, right? Mental, physical, visible, non-visible. So what is a person with a disability? It's a person with physical or mental impairment that limits their ability to participate in everyday life. In the sociocultural context, it means that there are barriers that prevent people with disabilities from participation due to the interplay of their condition with discriminatory attitudes and cultures, policies, and institutional practices. So, no, that sounds very complex,
big.
but we will go over kind of what sociocultural disability definition looks like, because it has a lot to do with how the world views disability today, but that's not always how people view disability throughout history. So that's super important and to learn about that when you're going through the process of accepting having a disability. Also, identity we're going to talk about. So that's the state of being a person and how we become one. We claim a certain identity, accepting your identity, and identifying as a person with a disability if you have some sort of impairment is super important when you are accepting having a disability. First person language, so when you're referring to people with disabilities, you say people with disabilities. Common terms that you will hear in like old context are like handicapped people or crippled. Those are not terms used today, especially crippled. That's actually technically a slur. But handicap is a common one. But it's better to call people with disabilities because it actually reduces bias. So the words like handicap and crippled are known to cause bias against people.
What if you say they're disabled? Would that be acceptable? Okay.
Yeah. A person who is disabled. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or you're disabled. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess just when you're referring to them and throughout this presentation, I'll likely say people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Sometimes
rather
I've
than
heard,
like
special needs. They say like special needs too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. that's a common one too. That's more common for like neurodiverse individuals. So that language is also kind of shifting to like adapted needs. Is a common term being used nowadays because of the context that comes behind the word special needs. There's a really interesting documentary on Netflix called Super Crip, I think that's what it's called, and it's about how people back in the 70s who were in wheelchairs, they got pushed into special needs even though they were cognitively able to
do stuff.
So again, the word special needs is another one that like the disability community doesn't like claim. Some people still do. Some people still use the word handicap. I do too. I use it when I'm talking about my parking spots or when I'm talking about like handicap stalls in like bathrooms. I would use the word handicap. I don't use person with a disability bathroom stall.
Right.
So yeah, it just depends on the person, but the updated language is going to be people with disabilities or like neurodiverse or things like that. So then we're also going to cover the disability models. So that's just that's the way that the world thinks about disability socially, and I'll take you through those frameworks about disability, and we'll talk about how they impacted people throughout history and how, thank goodness, we don't have them today. So, what do we think of when we hear the word chronic illness?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Sorry about that. Break.
Nope. Hide floating. Yep. And then exit.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Okay, let's go back. Okay, so what do we think of when we hear the word chronic illness? I think oftentimes people think of someone who is old, someone who is in like extreme pain 24/7 maybe, has some sort of device or takes like medication commonly, but I think the biggest like stigma is kind of that they're always old, right?
Yeah.
And then what do we think of when we hear the word neurodivergent? I think this one is totally on the opposite end. I think we often think of kids. Right? We don't typically think of adults having things
neurodivergency like stuff.
We often think that they're kind of out of control, or that there's maybe even some sort of physical disability that shows sometimes in people with neurodivergent disabilities, or they're just like not focused, they're really chaotic, or other like words that I hear, spontaneous, all over the place. And then what do we kind of think of when we hear the word disability?
Usually like a physical
yeah,
that you can see.
Yeah, like people in a
wheelchair or cane or like
canes,
prosthetics.
Yeah, typically there's some physical
hearing
aspect.
Blindness. Yeah.
And so today I kind of just want to teach that they all can actually be encompassed in one, because it can actually look like me. So this is me at 17.
Dark hair.
Yeah, I don't look the same. But this is me at 17, and at this point in my life, I had a chronic illness because I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy at this point. So a chronic illness is long-term and typically has no cure, right? So I had muscular dystrophy at this point. But at this point, I was still able to sit. I was still able to sit on the ground and take this senior photo. And I was still able to park in non-handicap parking spots. I only used a wheelchair if I ever went to Disneyland because it was too big there for me to walk around, but I still could walk. And I also, K through 12, struggled with, I never got diagnosed with dyslexia, but I had like really bad reading comprehension issues. And I've kind of gotten over them as I've gotten in college, but I had all three. And I don't think that this is typically the way that people would think people with disabilities would look, right? So
right.
Kind of trying to highlight that they are sometimes invisible.
You never know.
Yeah. So, what is stigma? So, stigma for people with disabilities refers to the negative stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination they face due to their physical, cognitive, sensory, or mental health conditions. It can manifest in various ways, which includes social stigma. So this is the misconception that people with disabilities are less capable, they have to be more dependent, they're even a burden, they cannot be independent, and that's kind of like the way that the world can view people with disabilities, especially when they don't have a disability themselves. And then internalized stigma is when actually individuals with disabilities believe those negative beliefs, that social stigma, believe those attitudes leading to feelings of shame or even low self-worth. So they believe that they're a burden. They believe that they can't be independent, and that they're less capable. So that can be a huge barrier in people accepting disabilities. And I'd say if anyone struggles with this, to talk to a therapist, talk to someone who specializes in mental health, and kind of try to overcome why do those stigmas like hold you back, right? So institutionalized stigma are policies or practices that create barriers to education, employment, or healthcare for people with disabilities. So a common example of institutional stigma is actually within the Social Security system. So when you are on Social Security as a person with a disability, you have to be making under a certain amount of income in order to qualify for it. Don't quote me on this, but I believe it's about like $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
However, if you get married, your household income has to be making under, again, don't quote me on it, but I believe it's about $3,000 a month. So you get married
Like complete
to someone,
poverty level, basically.
yes, yeah, it's a very low number
Yeah.
when you think about it.
Yeah.
And so this kind of puts people with disabilities in a box, right? They're often thought that they'll marry someone with that doesn't have a disability, so then that person will provide for them. But this kind of puts barriers on people with disabilities being able to get married to each other, because if they both work part-time and they make over $3,000, boom, their Social Security income is taken away. Even if they make $3,001, right?
Yeah.
It's taken
And
away.
benefits, all their medical benefits and
And
all
Medicaid is taken away.
that. Yeah.
So yeah, this blurb was actually a post from the New York Times. So for many people with disabilities, marriage can present a challenge, particularly a financial one. Those who receive supplemental security income, a Social Security program for disabled people, and older adults who have few assets and little to no income are at risk of losing their modest monthly stipend and the Medicaid that comes with it when they marry.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a plea for marriage equality for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know about that.
No.
It's very hidden in the Social Security system. You have to be part of it in order to know about it. So, how do we challenge stigma? We challenge it by first understanding where it comes from, and then you move on to advocacy work. So advocacy work means just speaking up for yourself, right? Those self-advocacy skills. And this can be for individuals affected by a disability, or this can even be family and friends who advocate for their disabled family members or relatives and friends. And then also bringing awareness to the matter, which we'll talk about that's part of self-advocacy and one of the final things that I'll talk about today. So, understanding where it comes from. Ableism is a concept that can manifest in different types of ableism. So overt discrimination is a form of ableism, which is denying a person a job. Excuse me, I should rewind. It's usually someone who is able-bodied, who projects ableism onto people with disabilities. So it's denying a person a job, education, or services due to their disability. So that discrimination. Microaggressions can be another way to contribute to ableism. And that can be done by subtle comments or actions, like assuming a person with a disability is inspirational just for doing everyday activities. So I know that sounds very interesting, and we'll talk about it more in a second. but that's actually very common for people with disabilities, that they are often seen as inspirational because they open a door, right? There's also systemic ableism, policies or practices that make it harder for disabled people to access healthcare, employment, or public spaces. And again, you can internalize ableism, which again, if this is something that you think that you're struggling with, I would recommend like turning to a mental health care provider to work through this. But it's when a person with a disability adopts negative societal beliefs, leading to feelings of shame or unworthiness. So they believe in those ableist beliefs. Examples of ableism. I think that these can help kind of to understand ableism. I've gotten this question a few times, because I'm in a wheelchair myself, and that if someone opens the door for me, is that ableism? And I'm like, no, not necessarily. However, I do think it could be ableist to some people in a wheelchair if you were to go up to them and say, can I open that door for you? And they said, no, I'm fine, I can do it. And then you proceeded to do it because you felt like they weren't capable of doing it, right? Or you even make a comment about how they're not capable of doing it, like a microaggression, right? So other examples are like lack of wheelchair ramps or accessible restrooms, assuming people with disabilities are less capable, dependent, or broken. That kind of ties into the example that I just gave. Speaking to a disabled person's companion instead of addressing them directly. I have this happen to me
Like they're
all
animals
the time.
or people or
So an example of this that I've encountered is at the airport. Typically when I'm with my fiance, we will both be going through the metal detectors. And if you have a disability, you can actually get a pat down so that you don't have to walk through that machine. And so sometimes I don't like to walk through the machine. Sometimes I like to just sit in my chair, especially if I'm having a day where I'm not super mobile. And oftentimes when I tell, like there was one time where I told this lady, no, I can't walk. And she asked me, can you walk? I said, no, I can't. And she looked me up and down and she went, you can't walk? And I said, no, I can't. And then she turned to my fiance and she went, she can't walk?
like you
Like you're not.
Like I'm not capable.
Like you just didn't say that.
Yeah.
you just didn't
like I
right
didn't just say no.
like
right?
you're a child or
Right?
something.
So,
yeah
Yeah, exactly. So it's acting kind of like I'm a child and I can't like advocate for myself.
right
It was very odd, and you know I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but that was very like
yeah
very
what did
blatant.
he say?
Yeah.
Like did she
Yeah.
she just
Yeah, he was like, yeah, she just said she can't.
right
So,
like why are you asking me?
yeah, he was very like.
She knows, I don't know. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, also using offensive language like crippled, again, that can be offensive to some people. It can to not, and it cannot be offensive to other people. Crazy, I put this in here because that's a common one for people with like mental disabilities, that they're just crazy or that it's just in their head. Not providing closed captions or sign language interpreters because it's too challenging or it's too hard or you just don't know how to do it, right? Let's say you have an employer who needs that and you're like, it's too hard. Can't do it. That would be another form of ableism. So, these are like the three frameworks throughout time that kind of shape the world's view of disability. So there's the moral and religious model. So this is when disability was viewed as a consequence of some sort of sin or karma, due to someone's immoral character or their limitation of religious devotion. So because their family or because they weren't religious enough, they didn't believe in God enough, they have some sort of karma put on them, and that's why they're impaired. People with disabilities were also pitied in this time and viewed in need of constant help and called slurs by society. So this moral model is not super common today, but you can see it. Like a prime example that I've seen of it is when religions demonstrate that they can like go up to someone and they can heal them like right away,
That's what I think of. Like,
right?
yeah.
And that there's something wrong with you having a disability, right? Our church is not going to accept it. We're going to put our hands upon you and say that we're going to heal it. We're going to get rid of it, right? We need to fix it. That's a way that I see it today, but most people don't follow this model today. But you can encounter people in your life that do. And you kind of have to recognize that. And if this is something that you don't believe in, then probably stay away from those people. I know I'm very wary of people that believe in this kind of model. This is the one that we more so follow today. But then the medical model came about during kind of like the 1900s when medicine was becoming really popular. So it's when individuals with disabilities are defined by their medical impairments, and an individual's identity unrelated to their disability is not empowered. This model focuses on a cure rather than the strength of a person with a disability. So it's all about, again, fixing that person, giving them the treatment that they need so then they no longer have a disability, right? We're still not accepting disability here. There's something wrong with you and it needs to be fixed. So this can also kind of fall into some of the critiques about it, or like it can fall into like eugenic beliefs where it's like, oh, you have a disability, you can't be accepted in society, right? And then but one good thing that came about during the medical model was prosthetics, because it was very like, let's fix this, let's give you
let's
an
find
arm,
ways
let's give
to
you a
help
leg.
you.
So that was like a really positive thing that came out of the medical model. But again, it kind of is that fix it mindset. Today we follow the social model, which is that disability is no longer seen as a moral failure or a medical issue. Society should adapt to impairments by reducing barriers and giving people with disabilities equal access to participate in society fully. So nowadays we have the ADA, right? That gives you, that gives people ramps or gives people accommodations in the workplace. So we're now adapting around disability rather than saying you need to be able-bodied in order to be successful in this society and to be able to engage in society and be part of society. So during the times of the moral and religious model, people were very cast out from society when they had disabilities. Okay? And thankfully we follow the social model, so that makes us a little bit more accepted in spaces. So there's also some identity theories about how people form their identity of disability. This is a very basic model. I don't know how I feel about it. Personal opinions. It's very simplistic. I think it's overly simplified, but I'll kind of take you guys through it. And some people might resonate with this and some people might not. But it starts with the acceptance status. So you become or you're born with a disability, you accept that disability, and the friends and family around you accept that. I think a lot of people get stuck here, especially when they don't have a visible disability. A lot of their friends and families don't accept it, and so they can't move into these other stages. But then it moves into the relationship status, which means that you meet other people who have similar disabilities, conversations, and you kind of learn about your disability. This part, I think, affects people with physical disabilities who can't go out into places very
And be
common,
similar, yeah.
or people with very rare conditions don't really meet this status sometimes, right? So we have to think about like access.
Very isolated, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the adoption status where you have like these shared values with people that you meet. And then the engagement status, which is when you become a role model, you help those in other statuses, so you help them get through all of these, and you support the disabled community. I would say that in my personal life, I've actually kind of followed this, so that's the part of me that believes in it. However, I've met tons of people where they get stuck in some of these, or they don't want to be a disability advocate. They just want to be a human being, right? They just want to be. They don't want to go into anything about supporting the disabled community. They just want to be an accountant. I don't know. So, yeah. But this is a theory of identity development. Here's another one called Super Crip identity, which is the belief that individuals with disabilities have to overcome or inspire other people when they're faced with challenges. This goes back to that topic of you always have to be inspirational. We see it in media. Think of movies with people with disabilities. They're either really inspirational or they're crazy and they're evil. The Joker, Captain Hook, right? He has like a disability technically. Or they're super inspirational, like a movie that I think of is Radio. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that. And they're great movies. I'm not saying that you can't watch them, right? I love all of those movies.
Right. Yeah.
But it's interesting how the media kind of depicts people with disabilities as one or the other. So that's this super crip identity. Is this excessive praise for common performance, such as just going shopping or engaging in hobbies. There's very low expectations for people with disabilities. This also kind of reclaims the slur cripple. We've seen a lot of like social groups reclaim old words that were known as slurs.
Like they're doing it themselves?
Yeah,
Okay.
like the disabled community who
Is
identify
bringing
with
up
super
that.
crip identity,
Uh-huh.
they're trying to reclaim the word cripple. So they're trying
Interesting.
to, instead of it being negative,
Kind of.
kind
Change
of like the
it.
word queer, right?
Right,
That used to
right.
be really negative in
Right.
society, and now the LGBTQ community has taken that and been like, we're gonna
Turned
use
it
that,
around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And then that results in some disability pride. That's kind of what I was researching. So those were just really interesting identity development theories that I thought were kind of cool, and I think people can see them in their lives sometimes. So just wanted to touch on that. Disability history is also super important. So over here, the Salem witch trials, some scholars believe that some of them had like neurodivergent disabilities, and that's why they were, what's the word I'm looking for, cast out.
Yeah.
They're also like
Put on trial.
put on trial and killed. Also during like that moral, religious, and the medical model, the circus was really common, where people with disabilities had to just go there because
Perform and show their.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The lobotomy is a example of the medical model. Actually, John F. Kennedy's sister was described as having mental retardation. She was given a lobotomy because they were
And they
trying
thought maybe
to
even,
fix her.
even bipolar, maybe.
Oh, really?
And that's why they did the lobotomy, because she was very like sexually active and all these things, like, and so for the shame of the family, she kind of after the lobotomy she became more mentally retarded, and
Oh, okay. Okay, that's right.
and then they kept her
Thank
in
you.
a
I'm glad you're here because I didn't know like.
it's a crazy story. It's like
It is.
dang, and it was kind of like this family secret thing.
Yes.
and, yeah.
Because at the time they were kind of following the medical model. We need to
Right.
fix this.
Let's fix this. Let's like fix the brain and what's going on.
Yeah. So, and then here is a prime example of like the social movement. I can't remember. This is the Capitol, called the Capitol Crawl. Don't remember if it was the 70s or 80s, but sometime around there. People who were in wheelchairs, they got out of their wheelchairs and they climbed up the stairs of the Capitol because back then there were no ramps. And so they
to
crawled
make
up
a-
the steps of the Capitol to make like a social statement. And that really drove what we now know today as the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh wow.
So this was signed by President George H.W. Bush on July 26, 1990. It prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. People with disabilities also now have equal opportunities and are not discriminated against based on their disability. Sorry, that was the same sentence. But I wanted to tie in here, this is also what made like public accommodations for people with disabilities.
So it says it took place in March, and so then a couple months passed, and then it was in July when they signed the.
When they signed it,
It's actually pretty quick for
but
a
it
bill.
started here.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm saying like from that point to there, like that really pushed things along. I mean, think how long they were probably trying, like years to try to get.
So it took
things.
place on March 12th of 1990, and then they signed the act in July. So
That's cool.
that's cool. So
They sped it up. Yeah. Finally, by 1990, it was like, let's give these people some rights. And the civil rights movement for people of color, that drove
This.
the Disabilities Civil Rights Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Without that, I don't even know if it would have happened for people with
Make a lot of
disabilities.
progress.
Okay, so the step of self-advocacy. It's important to know your rights under the ADA. Again, this goes for anyone who has some sort of impairment. Does not have to be physical. It does not have to be visible. So employment. Employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations unless doing so would cause undue hardship. Undue hardship is a very common legal term. I'm not going to act like I'm a lawyer and know what I'm talking about, but I've heard it a lot when there's some sort of accommodation being made. Also, when there's accommodations being made for housing, you're not allowed to ask for housing accommodations if it causes some sort of undue hardship. So what does that mean? That means a situation where providing an accommodation would cause significant difficulty or like a significant alteration to the job description. An alteration to school accommodations are another example, or an expense to an employer considering factors like their size, resources, and nature of the accommodation. So it can't, a common example is like if you're going to be working somewhere and you're blind, and that would, the job can be accommodated to you being blind, that's okay. But if the job requires you to have visible sight, if there's some sort of like requirement for that, that would be considered undue hardship. It can't totally alter the job description just because of your disability. You kind of need to find one that fits it, and then they can provide you accommodations for that. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Public accommodations, so businesses and other public facilities must ensure their premises are accessible to individuals with disabilities. Also transportation. Public transportation systems must be accessible to people with disabilities. State and local programs and services, they must ensure their programs, services, and facilities are accessible to people with disabilities. And telecommunication as well. The ADA requires that telecommunication services such as telephone relay services are accessible to people with disabilities. So how do I advocate for myself? Like I said, first off, you need to know your rights. You can learn more about laws that protect individuals with disabilities by visiting the disabilitylawcenter.org. You can also just look up the Americans with Disabilities Act and kind of read through and learn your rights there. But this is a really great resource if you run into any sort of discrimination or feel you're being discriminated against. I've gone to it and they've actually given me like free advice. I don't think everything's free there, so don't quote me on that. But they've given me free advice about some housing accommodations that I needed. And they were really nice. So there's one in Salt Lake, and there's one in there should be one in like every major city pretty much, and they can help advise you when you're facing discrimination. Again, I'm going to emphasize this, that is for people with mental or physical disabilities. I think that's super important. Communication is the next step to self-advocacy. So assess your needs. Ask yourself, what do I need in order to succeed with my disability? This can sometimes take a few months or years for people to discover. And then the next step would be to clearly communicate your needs. This is the hard part. This is the part that I see like a lot of my clients struggle with. So you want to be specific about the accommodations or the support you require in school, work, or daily life. A common thing that I teach people is to use I statements, such as I need captions for meetings to fully participate. That's kind of an example. Stay calm and assertive when you're advocating for yourself. Again, this is easier said than done. Obviously, there would be a lot to go into today if I were to kind of break this all down. But for anyone who feels like they're struggling with this, I again advise people to meet with like a mental health counselor or some sort of life coach who can help them with these advocacy and communication skills. And then what do I do when someone says no? You restate your needs, right? We go back to those I statements. And oftentimes People with disabilities can get really defensive because they have to defend themselves constantly. I think that's also important for family and friends to recognize that if you're ever on the phone with someone and they have a disability and they need some sort of accommodation and they're really frustrated and getting angry at you, they're probably just angry at the fact that the world is against them, right? I would commonly see that in working at accessibility services. The front desk people would always be like, why are they so mean? And I'm like, well, imagine going somewhere and you want to get inside a building and the elevator's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like put yourself in those shoes. But anyways, they oftentimes get very defensive, very kind of mean, and that's not a very respectful way to communicate to people. But I will admit, I understand where it comes from. I've been there. Okay, self-compassion is another important aspect of self-advocacy. So build confidence and your self-awareness. So recognize your strengths and your abilities. Do you like being that person who can be inspirational to people? That's great if you do. Practice explaining your disability in a way that feels comfortable to you. Focus on what you can do rather than what others assume that you can't. Resources also help build advocacy and connection, so find support and resources. Connect with disability advocacy groups or sometimes online communities are a great way. If you have a specific disability, you can oftentimes type that into like Instagram and find some sort of organization that does events and things for that, or type that into Google. And then reach out to disability service coordinators. So some examples of these in a school would be like in accessibility services, where in school you get like what's called a 504 plan or an IEP. In college, it's just called like disability accommodations. So you meet with those people to get the accommodations you need so that you can be successful. A lot of people are hesitant to do this. And I like to describe to people who are hesitant in doing this, like it's a bridge. And it's a bridge with planks in it. And you're going to school, and your goal is to, let's say it's college, so your goal is to get a degree or to graduate. People without neurodiverse disabilities or without physical disabilities can walk across their bridge and they can get to graduation. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's hard for everyone. However, people with disabilities, they have some of their planks missing. And so they have to jump over these missing planks to get to their graduation. And that's not fair. That's not equal. Because there's some people with missing planks and then there's some people with them. So in order to get equity, because people with disabilities start here and people without disabilities start here in school systems, in order to get equity, you get accommodations. And the accommodations give you planks for your bridge. So that you no longer have to jump over them, you can walk across them. So I highly recommend, if you're going to school, you can think of work accommodations the same way. State places like vocational rehabilitation are great in helping you find a career that meets your needs, and giving financial assistance for barriers. Financial assistance is not always guaranteed, but they often do that for people. And then work, like some sort of HR accessibility specialist. Going back to state, I know like the Social Security system is a really common barrier for people with like applying. Utah Department of Workforce Services is a great resource to contact, and they will help explain Social Security to you.
Oh, cool.
It's really
Good
awesome.
to know. Yeah.
Seek guidance from mentors, therapists, and support groups. Not to plug ourselves, but we
We do have a
illness
chronic
small
illness
group.
support group.
Which has been amazing for a lot of people with that connection. Because like we talked about in the beginning, if you have internalized stigma or internalized ableism, you probably kind of struggle with shame. So we work through stuff like that by building connection with people. And the chronic illness small group is a great opportunity for that here at South Counseling. Okay, documentation, document everything. This is my least favorite part of self-advocacy. I hate this so bad. But keep records of conversations, emails, and formal requests for accommodations that you make. And also keep a record of your diagnosis or a document that gives you proof of your diagnosis. I know some people are like, why do I have to prove that I have a disability? Totally get it. It's just how the world works, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So like if you're going to apply for things like vocational rehabilitation, you need to show proof that you have a disability. You even now need to show proof that you have a disability at like Disneyland, which is a little bit ridiculous to me, but I
Because
digress.
too many people probably abused it that
Exactly.
didn't need it.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Another thing to be aware of is burnout when you're practicing self-advocacy. So practice self-care. Self-advocacy can be exhausting. So take breaks and prioritize your mental health. Surround yourself with people who respect and uplift you can be another practice of self-care. But I invite everyone to find their own ways to practice self-care and not let their disability identity constantly overwhelm them in their lives, right? We still need to be human, and we don't always have to be a person with a disability. We can channel other facets of ourselves that we enjoy. Last step is to bring awareness and to start educating others. Once you, after this presentation, all of you are now experts. And you can now start to challenge stereotypes by sharing your experiences, or just challenging stigma whenever you see it is presented to you or presented to someone that you know. And then offer solutions when addressing accessibility issues. So yeah. That is pretty much everything that I have today. These are all my references.
Awesome.
Not very interesting. But yeah, overall, just kind of wanted to take everyone through how stigma can really cause barriers in that acceptance path. Other barriers can be when we have people in our lives that don't really accept us or don't believe that we have a disability. And so embracing that path and just continuing with your self-advocacy journey, I think, is really important. Assess your needs, and then learn how to strongly communicate those to people, and that, I think, is like the true way to embrace your path as a person with a disability and accept that disability identity. So thank you.
Love it. Thank you. Yay. Okay, well, thank you guys for watching online, and we will see you